Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a conversation about an exploration of heritage and identity through creative mediums. If everyone could go around and just say what their background is and what creative medium they explore, and how they relate to it really quickly, and then we can get going. Ashok, do you want to start?
I can do, yeah. Ashokhumar Mistry. Yeah, there's a whole thing about my name, and that's kind of connects to heritage. I am an artist, writer, curator, and I do a few other things as well. My connection to heritage in my work isn't obvious. It's more about the influences throughout my life, but I don't really kind of go out there to make things particularly Indian looking. It's more about kind of my day-to-day associations with things that I come across or people I come across, that sort of thing.
Sweet. Anisha, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Anisha Parmar. I'm a jewelry designer, artistic practitioner. My work's inspired by my family heritage, that British Asian identity, and my family's migrant journey. Yeah, my main exploration is through jewelry, like you can see what I'm wearing, using British Asian motifs and Indian motifs and updating them and making them very pop and very modern. Yeah, so that's me.
Maryam, do you want to go next?
Yep, so I am a photographer and mainly, well, I'm an artist, and I base my practice mainly in photography. I'm based in Birmingham, and my practice is all about my identity as well, and I'm a British Pakistani. My parents also are migrants from Pakistan, so I try and focus on representation and representing the South Asian kind of culture through my work, basically. Felt on the spot there. Never had a worse intro ever.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. Don't worry. Saloni, do you want to go next?
My name is Saloni. I am a Kathak dancer, and I'm based in London. For me, how does Kathak bring out my heritage and my culture? I think the form itself, being a classical Indian dance form from North India, is so rooted within its culture and so rooted within its heritage. It's rooted within mythology, and it spans back to hundreds of years old. I'm pretty sure Seetal can tell you a little bit more about it as well. But yeah, I think for me, it has brought me closer to my culture because it's forced me to explore many different aspects that I don't think I would have in a Western context or even in a 21st century context. Yeah.
Seetal, do you want to follow Saloni?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Seetal. I'm a Kathak dancer as well and arts manager as well. So I work in the arts in different ways and based here in Leicester. And I think my artistic practice relates to my heritage in a really fundamental way. But in the same way as Saloni, it's like exploration. And if I look at it, I'm from a Punjabi Sikh background, my family migrated from East Africa. So Kathak doesn't really have anything to do with that, to be honest. But Kathak is something that I do for me. It's something that is mine. That's my thing that I do and I use as a tool to express and explore who I am. And I also run a CIC, an initiative called Forward Culture. And that's all about empowering and supporting South Asian young women and artists. So it's using creativity for identity and empowerment as well.
Cool. Last, Nilupa.
Hi everyone, I'm Nilupa and I'm an artist based in Birmingham. Just like Maryam, I also use photography in my practice as well as craft. Aside from doing my arts practice, I'm also an educator, so I lecture in photography and fine art. I think for me, my heritage and my culture has become such an integral part of my practice, and it comes back to what Seetal said about how I do it for me, and in a way it's become something that I've used to almost educate myself before anyone else, but also find that my work relates to other people. And I think for me, it's always been one of those things that I find puts my work out there for other people to relate to also. So I think in that sense, it gives that sense of representation for the work that I feel really pushes me to keep on making this style of work and kind of keep exploring this further.
I mean, there's such a broad range of creative mediums here and such a diverse range as well. What was it particularly about the specific medium that you have all chosen to explore that called out to you? Was it something that happened very earlier in your life, or was it something that you later learned in life? If we can go around the same manner.
I mean, I'm going first. I work in a lot of different mediums, and to me, the medium isn't really important. It's more about what fits what you're trying to say. Hence, I kind of work across different areas. I was one of those people who, for me, I was an artist from the age of 7. There's a story behind that, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But I've always painted. And for me, that I thought that was the only route into art. That was kind of art. That's what encapsulated it. And then as soon as I graduated, it was almost like it was a release, because I'd done the painting bit, and now I wanted to kind of explore anything and everything there was, film, photography, the whole 9 yards. And over the last 24 years, that's what I've been doing. I've been exploring everything, and only like a couple of years back, I went back to painting. So I've been kind of round the block, so to speak. But I think I was trying to explain to another artist. They were asking, like, what's the point of like using all these different mediums? And the only way I could describe it is, when you've got a scientist uses different tools to kind of find the evidence that they're looking for, and they're looking for physical evidence. What we're doing is we're using these artistic media, but to look for emotional evidence. That's what we're doing. We're doing exactly the same job, but we're looking at things on an emotional level. So when we kind of create something in a particular way, or we move in a particular way, or we capture something in a particular way, what we're doing is we're finding the essence of that moment, the emotional essence of that moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I've never thought about it in that sense before. Anisha,
Yeah.
do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I guess for me, my kind of my work kind of comes from more of a commercial place. I mean, I studied fashion, I worked in fashion, and it's only in the last couple of years that I've started seeing my work more as an artistic practice. You know, for me, if you asked me 2 years ago, I'd say I'm just a jewelry designer, but I realize I'm so much more than that. And kind of my medium's really been looking at materials. Materials is really what inspires me. I've always been good at putting together different materials and the feel and the way they feel kind of on the body, using sculptural pieces on the body. And for me, for my master's work, for example, I made these huge body sculptures that told the story of my family's migrant journey. And jewelry was a way to create those big sculptures on a smaller commercial scale in a wearable way. So in my work, I use wood, I use acrylic, I use mother of pearl, I use all these hard materials and the process of laser cutting to give you that very traditional feel, but you're not wearing, you know, a heavy piece of Asian jewelry that's pulling down your ears. It's very much a fun play on my heritage. That's my jewelry. But my artistic practice side, which I'm now going back into and building, is very much looking at body form and building those huge body sculptures that I loved making almost like 6 years ago during my master's. So yeah, that's me.
It's really exciting. I didn't know that you made body forms. That's something to look out for in the future.
Yeah.
Maryam, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ashok, you explained that so beautifully. For me, I quite similarly use photography because I have a really special relationship with it. From a very young age, I was very kind of intrigued by the photographs in my family album, and it kind of always was special for me to look at these images and resonate with a time that probably wasn't in my life, you know, and resonate with people that I had met, such as my grandparents. And I think that all kind of tied into my exploration in heritage and exploring what it means to be, you know, a British Pakistani and all these kind of things that, you know, we often labeled with as individuals. So that's quite similarly how I use photography, because I have this kind of special connection with it. As of yet, I only use photography, but I do try and dip in and out of researching and exploring other kind of sound and video and things like that. But for me right now, photography has kind of given me that kind of storytelling aspect of what I'm trying to show my work.
Saloni?
Yes, I think for me, my journey in dance from when it began to where I am now has been very up and down with its attachment to my culture. So for example, why I started, and I was introduced to dance very, very young as a child, just going to sort of Kathak classes. And that was, you know, growing up in London, your parents often put you in Kathak, Bharatanatyam, Tabla. And so that's how I was introduced to it. But I really grew very attached to those classes, as it was my only sense of familiar community. I was racially bullied in a majority white school, and I felt very isolated, and for the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere, and those were in my Kathak classes. Then dancing further, my enjoyment for Kathak sort of stopped being just about the fact that it was something I related to culturally, and it became more just a love for dance and how I feel when I move, and how I feel, you know, that rush when I feel when I'm performing or being taught something, or finessing a movement, or just spending hours in a studio. And then as I slowly started to take it as a profession, the importance of its cultural heritage sort of came like a truck back to me, with such force, because I was suddenly exploring with a lot more maturity different concepts and different theories, which are very, very much in the nature of its storytelling, which are usually mythological stories, and they're stories that you're grown up being told as almost like bedtime stories. But now you're not only hearing them, you're the one telling them. So you're the one having to think twice about what you're telling. And then you're thinking back to those mythological stories in that time, and you're questioning the progressive nature of them. And often these mythological stories are a lot more progressive than we're told, because the storytellers at the time were not progressive. That doesn't make the stories not progressive. And so just being able to explore these different ideas that were introduced to me as a very young child, it just makes me feel like I'm part of a community, which is so deeply attached to what I love doing, just as a person outside of my culture. So I think it ties sort of every part of my being very beautifully together, which I really love.
I definitely resonate with that last point. I think Kathak is such a holistic art form, and I'm super biased, but I think it's like the most holistic art form. Sorry, controversial. Just because it combines visuals with poetry, with music, with movement, with stagecraft, with costume. So you've got this whole very holistic kind of form to explore and try and grasp. But to answer the question, when it comes to why I feel connected to Kathak and my heritage, there's something that I came into Kathak quite late as compared to Saloni. It was when I was 21, 22 years old during university. And something that I love about Kathak and keeps me inspired is the stories of women, and an aspect of Kathak and Indian classical dance that's often a bit shunned or not spoken about as much is the courtesan contribution. So the wives, they're called courtesans, or the bais, or these women who were either in the courts or they were in kotas, so in that kind of industry and performing for majority men, but they were highly trained, specialized in literature and arts, Kathak dance, but then music as well. They were singers, they were poets. So these were really, really interesting women with amazing lives who understood the power of their sensuality and female sexuality, and something that, you know, growing up as a South Asian girl in the UK, or even in India, it's not often like that encouraged to be proud of being a woman in the fullest sense, being sensual and being proud of your femininity. So Kathak allows me to explore that and be inspired by these women who were incredible, you know, and they knew how to, yes, manipulate men through their sensuality and through their expressions, but they were so powerful. These women own land, like they were rich, they were independent in a lot of ways. So I think that's one aspect of Kathak as a female, as a woman, that constantly inspires me, and something that I do like to talk about, because these women are often shunned for who they were and what they did.
That's great. I feel like everyone said everything and I don't know how to top it all up now. But, I think for me, I kind of came into photography through studying. So I was doing A-level photography, and it kind of, I think from there, a lot of my like photography history kind of began. And I think once I started university, I realized that a lot of the times you never find anyone that either looks like you or is exploring topics that you actually relate to in like the photography world. And I mean, there are amazing artists who are doing it, but it's just one of those things where you saw that there was that lack of representation. And I think that's what almost drew me into like exploring these ideas and exploring a lot of themes and topics that were about me. I mean, I was like one of the only colored person in my university degree, and I think it's just little things like that where you find that a lot of people aren't used to understanding what your cultural background is, or a lot of the times they have this kind of misconception because of what they've read or what they've heard. And I think it was like little things from like, you know, how does being a Bengali woman relate to my work? How does being a Muslim woman relate? And it's like seeing how all these things kind of almost brought together what my work was about. And I think for me, a lot of it was about building a platform that others could relate to, and a platform that for people who look like me could feel like, you know what, there is work out there that is about us. Because I think that's what I've always found, that whenever I've made work, I've always had someone that's turned around and said that, you know what, I've never seen work like this, because I've never seen people like me doing things like that. So I think for me, that's always been something that photography has allowed me to do. And with me, a lot of my practice revolves around using craft forms. So I do a lot of weaving through my arts practice. And for me, weaving automatically just connects me to South Asia, and it connects me to a lot of the heritage that we have in South Asia, and not just in Bangladesh, from India, from Pakistan, all around us. It's like this whole history that we almost forget because of the fact that, I think sometimes it's just the fact that the curriculum that you're used to and the arts that you've been taught through school, and you just assume that art is just that. So I think I remember like when I discovered so many artists that, you know, whose names I could pronounce just simply that much, was, I think you felt that connection to the work. And I think especially seeing that happen with my arts practice is something that I've always felt connected me back to the work. And I think it's something that still till this day pushes me to keep making the work, because I know that even if I don't fully enjoy it, I know that someone else is connecting to it in some way or another. So yeah.
Amazing.
Completely agree. Yeah. Sorry, Ruby.
That's all right. We've naturally started talking about representation now. All of you are incredible artists with incredible different mediums and explorations. Do you, and we've started talking about lack of representation in any form of creative industry and in the media. Do you feel any sort of pressure from yourself, from society, to be as a role model or as a leader for South Asians? Whether that's negative or positive. Anyone can answer that, feel free.
I think, just off the top of my head, I think for me, the work that I've done and the work that I'm doing, it's always been about me and my own practice. But the more I've done it, the more people have reached out and said, just like you said, Nilupa, that people resonate with it. And I think that has been the thing, because there has been so much lack of representation thus far. When there are kind of the younger generation that identify with what you're doing, it kind of makes you feel like you're on the right track. You've just got to keep going. There's people out there who resonate with it, and that's what makes what we do so worthwhile. I think getting a message saying, you know what, I identified with what you do inspires me so much. I feel like I am represented. I feel like there's somebody out there that's kind of holding the baton to kind of pass forward. And I think for me, that has been the most rewarding thing about being a creative and representing heritage and identity. So yeah.
I think I completely agree with what you said about how, like, when you get a message from someone saying that they relate to the work, and automatically you just know that, like, the hours you spent trying to make this like specific body of work just suddenly makes a lot more sense. I think I've not yet felt anything negative towards the work that I've been making in order to have like kind of that representation feel to it. But I think it's one of those things that sometimes you, like, especially when I'm making work about, like, when I'm making work that has like a religious foundation, I have to be careful that I know what I'm speaking about, purely because it's such a big topic that you can't just go out there making statements about various things. And I think it's one of those things I see a lot where people are making work about Muslim women, and it's one of those things where I'll look at the work and I can see where they're coming from, but then they haven't worded it right, so automatically you get all that taboo that comes out of it, what you read in the media, and all of those things that start like boiling up a lot. And I do feel that a lot of the times, especially when you see the work in a white audience, automatically they just assume that you're going to make work about the hijab, or you're going to make work about being a Muslim woman. And I think it's kind of like working around those kind of ideas. I think it's more when you're like in a environment where you're not where you're the only brown person with the brown person's voice. I feel like it's a lot more important what you say and how you say it. I think sometimes when I show work to like my aunties and my mom, and they're like, oh yeah, that's nice, and I'm like, but do you know what I'm talking about? So I think a lot of the times we have those kind of conversations where I find that the work, it depends on who's viewing it and how they take it. I mean, I've sat through like portfolio reviews of people who are not like from South Asia or have like any kind of context to the work that I'm making, where they're very, not negative, but just very blunt about, but what is this? And I'm like, but this is what, you know, Britain is, this is what this art photography, this is how like we have this platform to be able to make work that is about so many different things. But you'll always get that one person saying, but is it really needed? I'm like, yeah, it is needed. So I think you have to kind of like, you have to understand those conversations when they happen, because sometimes some people just come from a place of like ignorance where they just don't understand and they don't want to. But a lot of the times it comes back to that idea of like you making the work benefits at least one other person, that's not just you. So I think it's that whole like round circle that you come back from.
I just want to say there's a real tightrope that we all have to walk, in the sense that on the one hand, we really have to kind of consider perceptions of our work, or preconceptions of our work. And on the one hand, we want the work to actually speak for itself. And on the other hand, we want people to actually understand the work, you know, straight off. But when there's certain people who are expecting you to make work in a particular way with, I don't know, with all their tropes and stereotypes attached to it, then that conversation around how you actually frame your work becomes really difficult. And the conversation with the people that you're trying to encourage to kind of follow in your footsteps, or, you know, to kind of follow as the next generation, becomes a lot more difficult. I guess what I'm trying to say is we're on this tightrope. On the one side, we're being exoticized, and we're being seen in a particular way. Our work is being seen in a particular way, and whether we like that or not, that's happening. And what do we do? Do we either challenge that, or do we just stay true to what we're actually doing? And on the other hand, what we're also trying to do is to use our work as a vehicle to actually open up the debates around the society in which we live, the communities in which we live. So it's like a double-edged sword, I guess. And when you couple that with people seeing you as a role model, even when you haven't kind of like asked them to, that becomes even more difficult.
Absolutely.
If I can jump in, yeah. I mean, I agree with what Ashok is saying. It is quite a tightrope, and it's whether I think there's 2 points I wanted to kind of make. One is that it's a question of whether this whole representation aspect is a responsibility or a burden, or I used to really get really passionate about it and be like, yeah, representation, I can represent South Asians, like I can put myself in these spaces where I'm representing and all of that. But now I've come to realize that you can only represent yourself, really. And it's dangerous to actually put yourself and have that kind of mentality of like, yes, I'm representing South Asians, because like there's so many people and so many communities that are not represented even within the South Asian sphere, of that aspect. And when it comes to caste or class or different parts of South Asia, or whatever it is, there are so many privileges and aspects to that. So I think I've come to accept that we can only really represent ourselves and our own experiences. But yes, what we can do is maybe open a door or a small window to say, look at all this, not my background, but like, look at all this, look at all these people, and look at this, all of this stuff that you didn't know. South Asia is all of this and more. And I think, I just remember I had a conversation with BBC Asian Network one time, and it was about whether people should anglicize their names at work. I just remember that. I think it scarred me for life, that conversation, by the way, because it was, I was saying, no, we shouldn't have to anglicize our names or change our names to make it easier for white people to pronounce. But the presenter was saying, it's such a burden, like it's such a burden to carry South Asian heritage and all of these responsibilities, all this culture our parents have given us, and these names that are hard to pronounce. So it's so like inconvenient and such a burden. And
he called his son Winston, didn't he? Which was hilarious.
Yeah, he called his own son Winston. Anyway, some people have that perspective. Some people want to call their sons Winston when they just don't look like a Winston, but it's fine. That's their choice. But I think, you have to make that choice. You have to say, do you embrace your heritage? You can't change the color of your skin. If you go to maybe you can if you have enough money. But if you go to a school or you're growing up, you are going to be looked at a certain way. So you have to make peace with that and make a choice. Do you look at it as a responsibility or a burden? Are you going to embrace your heritage with all of its imperfections and change things or accept things?
I challenge that.
Okay.
That story about the Winston. I guess a lot depends on motive. Some people change their name out of fear.
That was like the whole debate. It was, my view was like, we shouldn't have to.
Yeah,
but some people have
what
to.
we also need to remember is heritage. Well, kind of culture as we see it is fluid. It's never solid. It doesn't actually sit in one kind of one form. And no matter how much you want it to, what we tend to do is we tend to pick things from history, different points of history, and call that our culture. But when you actually look back, they never existed at the same time. That all of those cultural points or traits or whatever you want to call them never existed together. They all evolved and to a point where we see them as existing at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I agree. I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Ashok, because even like the place of South Asia, it's so complex. It's such a big landscape. Although we all tie in, you know, with so many similarities, we also have so many drastic differences all across and for over different, you know, generations and eras. And that's one thing that's really pivotal to translate or to, you know, kind of communicate to audiences in Britain, and predominantly non-Asian audiences, because, you know, I often, you know, I was speaking to Nilupa about this, you know, comparing work, you know, with Pakistan, when you're trying to represent a Pakistani kind of narrative, and then people will compare it to, you know, Bangladeshi or Indian. They already have skipped the part of actually understanding or acknowledging how complex you know, South Asia is and how rich it is. And that's one thing that we all bring in different ways to our work. You know, Kathak dancing is so kind of, it's such a classical, you know, dance for so many parts of India, and it's just beautiful that, you know, you're from North India, so you're Punjabi, right? So it's Seetal. So it's very intriguing that you've kind of embraced that, but that's also part of the story. You know, it's translating and narrating that idea that
it's
this
definitely
is the complexity of the place.
Yeah, it's definitely what Ashok said though, like it is picking and choosing. And as from the diaspora, second generation, first generation immigrants, you know, whatever stage we're at in our journeys and in this whole story, the fact is that, yeah, we pick and choose. We're allowed, we have the privilege to pick and choose aspects of our culture that we want to take forward or challenge or reject.
Or balance.
Yeah.
But we've also got we've also got the right. Sorry,
go ahead.
I'm just kind of taking back the point that Seetal just made, and there's like there's a flip side to this whole argument about culture, and that is making your own culture as well, about picking and choosing in the now for the next generation. But the motive behind that is really important. Like, for instance, when we pick names, when we have kids, we pick names. It's really important to understand that name and understand the motive behind picking a particular name. Now, it may be that the Winston of the world, his parents didn't really kind of have much of an understanding of names, or maybe they even did, but they wanted to ignore that fact. But I guess what I'm saying is everything's open, everything's kind of nothing's closed and nothing's solid either. Everything's fluid, it's moving, and there's lots and lots of different strands kind of weaving together at the same time.
I just do want to add to that. While I do feel like I completely relate to what Ashok is saying about being in the now and for future generations picking and choosing your aspects of your culture, I do feel like there is a sense of a responsibility, I personally feel, to represent the context behind your culture. And that sort of echoes what Seetal says about caste and class, because when at least I could talk about the Indian classical industry is hugely casteist in a lot of ways, especially Carnatic music. You know, it's hugely casteist. And even if we talk about Hindustani classical and even North India and its classical forms, when we bring up the caste debate, there isn't representation there at all, especially when it comes to programming within India. Programming outside within the diaspora, the reason I talk about this is because not only do we represent ourselves as a South Asian community, but we also represent ourselves with the understanding and the intention to educate that the South Asian community isn't just one bubble. You know, like what you guys are saying, that it is a complex space. But I feel like while you pick and choose to go forward, your picking and choosing has to come with a very definite understanding of its context. So even the Winston of the world needs to understand that the context behind his name is Churchill, and Churchill was racist. So having an Indian boy named Winston is just the weirdest thing. And so, you know, just, I feel like as the diaspora specifically in a Western context, while we can have the privilege of you know, welcoming a Western context with our South Asian heritage and pick and choose what we feel, you know, is the most productive way forward, it is really important that I personally feel to not to also represent the context behind it, which is the hundreds of years of hierarchy within caste and class. And I feel like that plays a huge part.
I think with the conversation about having the privilege of being able to explore and to create is actually a really big privilege, and it's something that we don't really talk about much in our community at all. Is like, for instance, I'm sitting at the Saloni, you guys already know that. The amount of families that we get who come here and they still don't allow their children to have a choice on whether or not they're allowed to wear silk or cotton. And that's how tightly wound certain people's lives are, unfortunately. The fact that we have this opportunity to create and to have conversations and discussions and create platforms like this to be able to participate is not a privilege that some South Asian people in the UK at all have. There are unfortunately young girls who are forced to get married. There are young girls who are forced to not go to college and university and so on and so forth. So it is a complete privilege to be able to be creative at times, I feel. Would you guys agree with that comment?
I would challenge that.
Go for it.
I know there's this whole kind of narrative around the arts being elitist and a privilege, and obviously when you've got to put food and water,
no, I didn't
food
mean
on the
it
table
as an elitist thing. I mean, as in some people do not have the opportunity to even do. I mean, creating something is something that you do out of love, out of passion, out of when you start creating, you can spend 12 to 14 hours doing the same thing, but you're really enjoying what you're doing. Some people don't have that opportunity, nor will they ever get that opportunity in their life.
Definitely.
So it is.
I definitely agree there's the whole hierarchy of needs aspect to it. And when you come to artistic practice and being an artist, like that is a super, you need a lot of support for something like that. And there is that whole aspect. But I think one thing I'd like to mention, the reason I challenged it was because I feel like being creative is not something removed from being a human. Being creative is, to me personally, is a fundamental aspect of being a human being. And so it's just, I'd always like to encourage that, especially within South Asian cultures, for our communities and whatever community we're part of, our families, our friends, and people in our circles within the South Asian context, not to look at art or creativity as something removed. It's like our cultures are so creative just effortlessly. Like we are creative without even trying. We create, and our languages, like Ashok was saying, the names that we've been given, our poetry is sometimes, they're from beautiful backgrounds and the scriptures. So that's just one point. I know being an artist, and when it comes to economics, and there is a hierarchy of needs, 100%. But when we come to being creative,
it's a hierarchy of the freedom that you're given as well.
Yeah,
like,
as much as there's freedom, I think you have to appreciate how much hard work and emotional kind of drainage goes into being a creative.
Yeah.
When you're a creative, your heart, your soul, your mental well-being is directly linked to what you're creating. As much as we can say, oh, you can spend 14 hours and it's a lot of fun and yeah, it's amazing. It's not always amazing. For me, my mental health has been directly linked to what I create. If I'm not feeling great, or if I'm suffering emotionally, so does my work. And you can see that it's linked directly. So I think a lot of hard work and a lot of emotional strain goes into creating. And yeah, as enjoyable as it is, sometimes it's not enjoyable. Sometimes it's really not.
Sorry, just going back to the point about it being a privilege, or maybe that's how I understood it. I think creative, as Seetal was saying, creativity is an intrinsic part of humanity. It's something that you can't very easily suppress, and you can look at oppressive regimes, and what you'll actually find is people will find their own way of expressing themselves. They will always find, and even if it's just something like making patterns with stones or something in one dark corner of wherever they exist, or kind of making lines in the sand or whatever it is, they will find some way of doing that. And the whole point of culture is culture actually means a sharing of ideas. So you're sharing that with someone else. That will happen whether a dictator likes it or not. You go into the darkest spaces in humanity and you will find people creating. They have to. It's part of who we are. In a prescriptive life forever. Everyone, and I've seen it myself. I've kind of looked at, especially when you look at younger generations, to keep still, and you tell them all to kind of like put their fingers, and what they'll do is for a few seconds they'll do it, and then after a while they'll kind of find some way of actually kind of spending that time. They'll kind of like count some, like goof off, and that's part of creativity. It's that urge to actually do something more than the mundane.
Saloni, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to completely echo what Ashok was saying about how everybody has this like innate sense of creativity, despite where you are, despite what you're doing. And I just want to say that looking to the future, the idea and the efforts are for a creative to want to be. I think that's the whole idea of everybody, I feel like, on this panel being creative is grows and grows, the less of a privilege it becomes, and the less it becomes a needs the system, the louder our voices are, and therefore the less we need from the system and from the rest of the world, because then we become self-sufficient. And as a diaspora world, we were never self-sufficient. Only now are we scratching the surface of self-sufficiency, and that too hard. And so I feel like there is a real point of pride in the creatives of the world today. And while we can focus, a privilege to even have the opportunity to be a freelance artist and not have a great income, but still be able to live a comfortable life. But I feel like there's a great point of pride in the other perspective, that had it not been for this world of creatives, then we wouldn't see a future where, maybe someone who can afford to be a creative can still consider it.
Sorry.
Creativity as a profession.
Yeah, go ahead. Is everyone's videos okay, or is it just mine that's broken up? Go ahead, Ashok.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
The issue of privilege comes in when we start talking about creativity being a profession. So as soon as we kind of professionalize, saying that you need to prove yourself in order to be a professional. Now, with technology, being a migrant in a new space, that straight away shuts you out. We have lots and lots of creative people here in Leicester, generation on generation on generation. But a lot of them, because of language barriers and stuff, they haven't been able to actually enter the professional space. So they've been working, off their own steam, and they're seen as amateurs. And that's where this kind of divide actually appears. It's when we actually start to differentiate ourselves as professionals from amateurs.
Do you feel like the creative industry in the UK has got a big divide versus young emerging artists versus people who are more established, and entering that plane is difficult. Just that perception.
Yeah, definitely. Does anyone else want to? I've been talking.
I think because I graduated in 2018, and for myself, I felt like you have to, the opportunities are now, you know, there, people are having conversations about race representation, and I think that's been going on for the last kind of 2 years, or that kind of encouragement, more than ever so before. And, you know, maybe 10 years ago it wasn't like this. So I think that that gap, you know, it's I think getting yourself immersed is good enough, and once you're on that kind of journey, you can connect and keep kind of working and continuing, because the kind of goal is that you create the new work, and you know, you try and network and learn from people before you. But I do think that there, in my kind of industry, I think that the older kind of artists, the more established ones, they are usually willing to help and willing to give that kind of support or advice as such, which I think is quite important, you know, for any artist to develop and grow, and to actually make a career out of, you know, this. So I think, yeah, that is it just depends. I think for other people it might not be that.
I'll jump in. Just looking at the wider dance sector in the UK, I think is something to say about I think, you know, coming to the whole, as Maryam was saying about the diversity and representation argument. Say, for example, there's institutions where they have an associate artist, so the artist that they support, and they give commission money for that artist for a certain number of years. Well, it's not actually a certain number of years. I think it's a very long time. And what ends up happening is that artist is supported for a long time, for a long period of their career, but that doesn't give space for more people to come in. And also what ends up happening is perhaps in some way there might be that diversity quota filled. So say, for example, you've got a venue and they're like, oh yeah, we need to have X number of like diverse BAME artists in our portfolio of artists that we support. And it's like all these people, you know, we're a minority, there's a limited number of us knocking on the door, and it's like, oh well, we're already supporting this artist of color or this like Muslim artist or this, so we don't need more Muslim artists. Like, I'm not saying that's what they say they're very nice, or everyone is very nice, but it's that kind of system.
It's a tick box, isn't it? You end up
right, you know, there's a limited number of us, and they have their limited numbers of quotas they need to fill. But it ends up being that those established artists fill that space for a long time, and then everyone else is emerging for the rest of it.
I think
so that's what I just seen a little bit of.
Yeah,
completely.
I think you hit, Seetal, I agree. I think that does.
Sorry.
Well, I think sometimes, like, when you're applying to different things, and if it's an organization who hasn't worked with a person of color for, like, you know, you research them up and they haven't ever worked with someone or they haven't worked with enough people of color. Sometimes I'm applying and I'm like, am I just going to be the tick box person that they just take on because, you know, I'm probably like one of the other people that applied for something like that. So I think in that sense, sometimes you do feel like, okay, where does that fit in? So I feel like I agree with what Maryam said about how, like, there are organizations out there that are doing what they can to be able to make it more diverse, but then it is still like majority of the industry is still like very much for people in like so many years into their career, and it's like it's really hard to kind of break into that. And again, it comes back to the idea of even after you broke into it, you're still classed as the emerging artist. So it's like, when are you not an emerging artist anymore? And like, even if it's like, say for example, you use age as a factor, how do you balance out when will I become an artist in my mid-career, when still there's artists who are in their mid-career but I'm still an emerging artist, but then there's artists that are coming up from like starting their career off. So it's like, where does that cycle kind of come, and like where does the foundation lie in that? So I think it comes back to like what industry you're talking about, and where you place yourself. Like, for example, I would say that probably the industries in and around Birmingham are a lot more diverse than what I've seen outside. But again, it might just be that the ones that I'm in connection with that I feel that are diverse, whereas not many are. So I think it just depends on where you come from in the industry. And sometimes it's just who do you know, and that opens up a lot of doors as well.
And can I just also add there? I also think the region does matter, because I always find people from London, they always get to the biggest, you know, gigs and things, and then people come from the Midlands and East Midlands and, you know, anything up north. We do kind of have to really find, you know, those relevant opportunities and run after things. And I think Londoners are privileged in that way, because once they've gone to like one gallery in London, that's it. People want to internationally want to work with them or whatever it might be. I think definitely regions do matter. Yeah, Anisha, you were going to say something.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, coming from London and moving up to Derby in the Midlands.
Oh God.
So
terrible.
So a massive change, huge change. Tough settling in. But I think once I seeked out opportunities locally, I felt like the Derby Quad thing, Ashok, where we met. I felt like it was building contacts and getting in touch with people and getting responses from people. It's been so much nicer and easier to do that up here than it ever was for me in London.
People are nicer in the UK the further north you go. People get nicer and
I agree.
I grew up in Leeds. Everyone has said hi.
Even though I'm a Wembley girl, I completely agree. You know, like through and through. I think people are much nicer. People are more willing to listen, take on new ideas, and yeah, it's been easier to kind of pave my path up here. So yeah.
I just want to add this whole idea of the gatekeepers. So whilst we are looking outwards, it's also about looking inwards. And it's echoing what Nilupa and what Seetal said, which is that when you create space within your community after you've taken that space up, for being a minority community. So years ago, as a minority community, you took that space, you got that commission, you got that residency at that venue, but then it is your responsibility as well to then create that space for
other people,
for everybody else in your community as well, knowing that it isn't just your space to occupy, you know, it's for everybody. And then that responsibility really is on the gatekeepers of whatever industry that you're in, to look outside their tiny bubble, to take off their blinkers and not just pick their three favorites always.
Completely agree.
When we look, I just wanted to build on that point quickly. When we look at opportunity in an industry, well, hang on, let me back that up a little bit. If you have an industry, you have to have opportunity. In order to have opportunity, you have to have a policy for that opportunity. It was around 2010, we had a massive shift in the arts where they said, we want to see the best of everything. You know, it's all about great art, the best you can find. And what that did was that cut off opportunity for a lot of people at the bottom. They've been trying to level that up for years. The biggest problem that we have is stratification. So what happens is some venues will only work with certain artists of a particular caliber, and they will, you know, they feel as if it's their right to say no to everyone else. And with that, what happens is, because certain artists from certain communities haven't had those development opportunities, those whole communities then suffer because they can't get to that particular level, and then they can't get picked up. Look at people like Harun Mirza. If he hadn't won that Northern Art Prize, he wouldn't have got anywhere. He wouldn't have gotten shows down in London or shows in New York or whatever it was. That was his turning point. You know, it was an opportunity for him. Those opportunities are few and far between. We really need to kind of think about how we see people. The other problem is issues around disability, in the sense that some people can't. They have difficulties in how they frame their work. So how they talk about their work, how they write about their work. It's all those kind of like those value-added bits that have to go with your work itself, how you present it, all that kind of stuff. If they can't do that in the first place, or if they're having difficulty with that and there's no one there to help, how are they actually going to progress?
Absolutely. I think the conversation that we're having about gatekeepers is particularly really important. So I was in London for about 9 years, and I've only been in Birmingham for a year now, and I'm literally heading back in a couple of weeks. But the art scene and the creative industry is something that I've really intertwined with in the last 9 years, and there's a huge barrier between most creatives and getting into the galleries in London. I think there's only 1 or 2 spaces on top of my head where you are invited to exhibit or participate. Or there's so many barriers in terms of finances, sponsorships, and all this kind of stuff that you have to do just to get into the smaller galleries as well. So should we then start to think about how we can create our own spaces and our own galleries and our own platforms, or should there be further initiative created by these companies and platforms?
I think certainly there needs to be like organizations, institutions, you know, gallery spaces, art centers that are already established that need to invest in art that is specifically you know, focused around, well, created by basically Black people and brown people. You know, there needs to be that, because from what I've seen in Birmingham, there's so many independent kind of organizations, and you know, it's really nice, you know, that kind of community. And even like South Asian Heritage Month is an initiative to bring all these kind of individuals or you know, smaller kind of organizations together and work, you know, together. But I think there's definitely that lack of interest in actual big organizations, or you know, like I'm saying, art centers and things like that, where it needs to, I think the opportunity needs to be created from there, because we need to get paid eventually. We can't just be doing collaborative stuff and, you know, just keep on these kind of small initiatives. You know, we have every right to talk about this stuff. We are, you know, products of people that have migrated here in the 50s and 60s, or, you know, before that. And, you know, it's time for us to actually feel like we belong here, you know, and that's going to be through our artwork or through our kind of practices that we do. So I think definitely that space needs to be created within bigger organizations as opposed to smaller ones, because I think there is enough support around, you know, even us talking in this panel, we are connected now, and we, you know, there's probably so many smaller organizations or other individuals that we are connected with that do the same thing as us. So there definitely needs to be more people like in bigger organizations representing that and voicing that and making space for us. I completely
agree. Actually, I feel like there's a huge onus on the existing huge galleries or venues to make a further effort in being more inclusive, because if we just keep creating things for ourselves, then it creates this whole us versus them culture. And I want to give the example of the Alchemy Festival that happened, that has now stopped, but used to happen at the South Bank Centre. When a year-long program was being curated for the South Bank Centre, everything that was within the South Asian culture just got funneled into the Alchemy Festival. And there was nothing else for the rest of the year, because it was like, oh, well, if it's South Asian, then funnel it into Alchemy. And the Alchemy was run by its own set of gatekeepers. And within that, there was exclusivity anyway. So and now that that's removed, it brings this whole greater idea and welcome space to be actually programmed for your work, rather than just because you fit under the category of South Asian work. So it's no longer enough to just create our own spaces, because we are, like Maryam said, we are part of a community. We're not somebody else that just joins that also wants to be included. So here, let's give them like this other corner. No, we want to be on the main stage, you know, like we want to be with everybody because we're part of the community. So don't just give us a little bit extra and expect us to be happy with it. And then often you get people that are actually you know, people of color that aren't doing work on identity and heritage and stuff like that, and you know, they in every right they deserve to have
platform in you know, these kind of spaces. I'm saying gallery spaces because it refers to my practice, but you know, in your own ways, that you know, there needs to be that space created, it needs to be inclusive, not something separate, or yeah, we've ticked the, you know, the BAME box basically, or you know, this sexuality box. It shouldn't be like that. It should just be very natural. You look at the work, you have people in organizations that are able to judge and assess and know what's, you know, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and have an understanding. You know, that's why there needs to be diversity even in bigger organizations. You know, for people that are leading, there needs to be that diversity there so that you can get people to relate to the different works that are submitted. So I think it's very, very important.
Can I just touch on
go
something?
ahead.
Really. Do you want to go? Do you want to go for it?
I was just gonna add sorry, Anisha, go ahead.
You go. It's fine.
I was just gonna add a quick comment. I also think there's a lot of change happening because of the Black Lives Matter movement as well. I feel like a lot of companies and platforms and galleries and stuff are now a bit more aware of it, not because that's an initiative that came to them naturally, but it's through the social environment we are in under now. They have to be conscious of how much representation they have. They have to be conscious of how many people on their board panel is diverse as well. It's something that I've seen naturally happen over the last couple of weeks as well. So yeah, just a little note of that.
Is it natural though? Is it tokenism?
No, it's absolutely not natural. That's what I'm saying. It's something that's happened due to pressure mounting on them around the social environment that we are under right now.
Definitely. Yeah, it's almost like you don't want to be a trend, but also you want to get those opportunities. It's that fine line, isn't it? Just going back to what I was going to say, it was basically about these gatekeepers and projects. I mean, from my research that I've done locally in the Midlands and in Derby, there's a few up and coming projects about heritage culture, specifically about South Asian heritage. And I have knocked on doors, showed the work that I've done, been present, been ready to take up opportunities, and it's not been reciprocated. So I feel like even if those projects are happening by people like the British Council or the National Trust, being there, being present, having the contact, knowing you've got the work to back it up, but still not having given the opportunities, knowing you're there, it's tough. I found it really tough saying, I'm ready, I've got all this work, I'm ready to go. You can be as enthusiastic and have everything to back you up, but still not get the opportunities when the opportunities are there. And I found that really difficult. So from my experience, it's going and making those opportunities myself and creating those projects on my own is kind of the way I've been dealing with it. But I don't know what your guys' advice would be on stuff like that.
I found really saddening is when I've been approached, it's always been from the context of South Asian-y kind of work. It's always been to target a particular community, or for the work to sit somewhere, or to celebrate something to do with something happened in South Asia. But those same opportunities don't come together in other work, you know, or around other spaces or around other contexts or themes or whatever it is. And that really kind of, yeah, it bugs me.
And rightly so, it should bug you, I think, because there's artists out there that are, you know, of colour, and they're not doing work on ethnicity or heritage, and they are assumed or approached in that way, that they're, you know, doing this kind of work. And yeah, if they don't do stuff on heritage, okay, that's odd, why would we choose you? Let's look at something else. So it's it needs to be ingrained within our kind of systems and in our kind of organizations, and that goes for education as well. That goes for university. Like, you know, I had just white middle-aged male tutors, and you know, it was very hard for me to talk about this in an academic manner, like about heritage and about culture in an academic manner. I didn't want to come across like kind of awkward talking about my ethnicity and, you know, self-obsessed or whatever. You know, if I was fascinated about certain stories in my culture or certain narratives, I couldn't have those conversations, you know, and I would get comments back which were the typical kind of Western eye or Western perspective on things. and that wasn't relatable. And now actually when I've entered the photography industry, I've come across so many brilliant, you know, South Asian artists and photographers. We've got Arpita Shah in this in the audience. She's one of the individuals that I wish I'd met at university, you know, even if I came across her work, and you know, if they had her visiting as a lecturer. So Nilupa is a visiting lecturer as well, aren't you, Nilupa? So how many young kind of people of color have you inspired? Because you need that conversation, you need to have somebody there to, you know, mentor you, facilitate you in some way.
But even when you're working at the cutting edge, it's really difficult to be seen in the context that you want to be seen in. I created a data-driven performance. So we were creating instruction for a dancer and a tabla player on the fly. But when I took that, so it wasn't anything to do with kind of Asian heritage or anything. The only reason I used we had tabla in the performance was because I developed the whole piece with this guy. So he was kind of giving me the notation, and I was able to kind of translate that notation using code. And I took this piece to various places, and all they wanted to talk about was how Asian-y they can make it. One person started talking to me about Indian cinema. I went in and he started talking about
Hollywood.
What's her name, Meena Kumari,
Okay.
you know, the old Indian actress, and I was kind of like, you know, what is it? And in the end, they weren't really interested. They just wanted to have the conversation and have me gone, kind of thing. But that was kind of their way in. Whereas the whole point of the piece was we're exploring our relationship with technology. It wasn't anything to do with anything, you know, anything other than that.
Yeah, I probably echo what Maryam said as well about the importance of it being an education. So it coming from, you know, when you're at your most, I'm losing the word, not vulnerable, but when you pick up the most, when you're at that age.
You want to explore things. You want to explore art in different ways.
At your most, you're at that age where everything around you is influencing you. Wow, I'm English. And so I remember I studied journalism at university, and all of my professors were just middle-aged white men. And my entire portfolio, well, not my entire portfolio, but at least 90% of my portfolio was about South Asian topics, whether it was demonetization that was happening at the time, or gender fluidity within Kathak, or, you know, so many other things. Even if we had to do reviews, I was picking South Asian artists and reviewing them. And one of my biggest feedbacks, which cut me down almost an entire grade, was that my portfolio wasn't diverse enough. It only focused on one area of the world, but I don't remember any white student who wrote solely about the UK or solely about Europe getting that kind of feedback, and they would get firsts like anything. And when I brought to them, I think at that time when I was at university, this whole wave of decolonizing your wardrobe had just started, and I really wanted to cover it because it was all over social media, and I really wanted to just, you know, it was a university portfolio. I wanted to write a piece, I wanted to speak to people, and I brought it to my professor, and he looked at me going, sorry, decolonize what? Sorry, what does that mean? I don't understand. Why would you? I don't understand. And I just looked at him and I was like, I'm going to save this for when I graduate, because
they don't want to have the conversation. They don't want to understand. They will, you know, people will have their own narratives, they have their own ideas. And I think that goes back to what South Asian Heritage Month is about. It's about talking about that story and telling the story correctly, you know. We need to speak up about our narratives, I think.
Not let people contextualize it for you owning it and contextualizing it yourself.
It's a bit like sorry,
no, go on.
I was just gonna say, it's a bit like women's stories, you know, like I'm really sick of people assuming that, you know, my mom or my grandmother were a certain way, or, you know, they, you know, just because they wear a headscarf, they might be a certain way, you know. I'm sick of that narrative. And actually that was one of the things that inspired me. I had a very ignorant, I'm going to say uninformed comment from my tutor. And it just made me think that, wow, there's actually people like this who think like this, who actually think that, you know, Pakistani women, they're a certain way. And, you know, they're not allowed to step outside the house, or, you know, or they lived in the UK for how long, and they can't speak English. And it's like, okay, well, actually that time was completely different. When my mom migrated, she wasn't even, you know, now when you migrate to the UK, they put up English classes, they, you know, make you interact and do these forms and stuff. And, you know, you have to, you know, to survive in the UK, you need to learn the language a bit. In that time, open racism on comedy shows and whatever it was, how can you, you know, again, that needs to be told, that story needs to be told to create cultural understanding. And that's how, you know, you do that through art and through photography or media.
The British had the audacity to invade South Asian countries, not even learn, most of them didn't learn a word of
integration. Is a two-way street.
Yeah, 100%.
Especially in education, we're not really going to have diversity until universities start to add South Asian dance to dance courses, even as a module, you know. We're not going to have these conversations. We're not going to ever stop these conversations around diversity until the universities really step up to the plate and start to try and understand the people that they're working with.
I think there's so many like us that I've spoken to, other creatives and artists who've had similar experiences at universities where they've either been knocked down or made to feel like what they're exploring is absolutely ridiculous, just like you, Saloni, the experience you had. I've had something similar, and I think a few of us have mentioned that, and I think that's awful. That's not fair. That's awful. And I hope and pray that people like us make changes and inspire.
So I went to a creative university as well in the UK, and I actually dropped out in my second year because my career was doing well and I thought I'd leave. A couple of years down the road, I gave a lecture at that university, and it was just an open lecture, anyone could come. And some of the board leaders were there, and I told them straight up, this was my experience at your university. The reason I dropped out was because the course leaders couldn't understand my work, and therefore did not have the tools to mark it accurately. If you don't understand the context or do not have the desire to research upon context, you can't mark my work. You can't understand the depth of it. So I left, and then they did, this university, which I won't name, did an initiative hire where they hired loads of BAME people to teach at the university. Which was disastrous, to say the least, because even though we had been invited into the space, we could not make effective change in any form or manner. I could not diversify the curriculum. And I was teaching photography. I could not showcase South Asian, Black, Asian, ethnic minority photographers and teach about them and showcase them, or take my students to exhibitions or invite lecturers in. So even when we get invited to these spaces, sometimes there's the gatekeepers that they really hold on to the stupid gate really strong. And I couldn't make any change, which left me frustrated. And as a young creative, I decided to leave that institution completely. But yeah, I mean, what Ashok was saying earlier about we won't be able to see effective change until the curriculum and the universities themselves actually change. That's absolutely accurate. And I feel like there's movements already going on as well. Like if you guys had a look, there's on Instagram, there's a page about that university now saying blah, blah, blah university is racist. And there's about 1,000 students who've commented about their experiences, about how they've been mocked and how they've been assessed and stuff. So there's conversations already naturally starting in our community. I don't know if you guys have figured out what you do.
I think I've seen it. I think I have. I'm not going to say it though.
Yeah.
I've seen that page. Yeah.
I feel like I'm probably the only one amongst all of us guys who didn't have that kind of experience at university, and I feel like it's important to also highlight the universities who are actually trying to do something different. And I think obviously it's not the same for everyone, but I know a lot of the content that I ended up making in university was purely because of the way my tutors kind of pushed me. And surprisingly, none of them were of color, they were all white. But I think it comes down to the fact of how people want to understand, and they want to be able to kind of explore what you want to. And I think I really benefited from that, in the sense that a lot of the content that I wanted to learn about, they knew about. So they were like well versed and well read, in that sense that when I pulled up so-and-so, they pulled up someone else. And I think that kind of initiated a conversation. But it completely comes back to that whole idea of how if there are not like people who are willing to learn, or just people of color in like higher institutions teaching it, you're never going to have that kind of understanding with the students.
Absolutely.
And it comes back to like what Ruby said about how being able to teach the content. Now I've been quite fortunate in the sense that I get to teach the content that I want to teach, and I think it being able to start, like I've had it being told to me by fellow students where, you know, a lot of the artists that I'm introducing them to, they have never heard of, exploring themes that are very, very close to what they are dealing with in day-to-day life. But just because, you know, they're not big names and they're not the ones that you learnt through from school to college to university, suddenly you just don't know of these people. And I think it's really important to kind of have everyone trying to be able to, like, you know, explore these things, and having artists that are, I think everything just comes back to, like, you know, the curriculum and the way the curriculum is taught. And it's like, you know, we hear about it, and where you learn about British history, and where British history is so much more than what you're taught in school. And I think it's kind of coming back to those ideas about what are like institutions really doing for like people of color.
Well, I'm really conscious of the time now. We've ran over a little bit actually. So I'm going to leave the conversation naturally there, but this is a conversation I know that Ruthless and South Asian Heritage Month will be continuing on later, if not in the festival, later down the road as well. I think it will naturally progress into a conversation that goes into education, the gatekeepers, how South Asian creatives are viewed in a bigger platform as well. I just want to thank all of you for participating today and sharing your insight and your wisdom. I really hope that anyone who's watching and viewing us checks out all of your portfolios and your pages, because you're doing some incredible things. And for those of you who chimed in later, don't worry, everything will go up on YouTube. And we'll have all the social media tags for everyone on our pages as well. Thank you guys so much.